Hey, welcome back to my garage. Today I'm going to take just a few minutes to share some of the tools and materials that I use to service lawnmowers out of my garage. Now, these are tools and stuff that I've accumulated over the years, some of which is vital in servicing lawnmowers, some of which is maybe overkill, maybe things you don't think you'd ever be able to use. But at any rate, I'll share my list with you and then you can decide whether or not this stuff would be good ideas for you. So the first and probably the most useful tool I have for servicing lawnmowers is a basic tool. Can't get along without it. This is a basic spark tester. Simply a neon bulb inside a glass tube. Connect it in line with your spark wire, and if you've got spark, you get an orange flash every time. Now, this type of spark tester works basically the same way, except that you ground this one out and you put your tester in line with your spark plug wire, and then you see how much of a gap it will jump. This is adjustable, the gap is adjustable. So this helps you determine how high the voltage is for you. Common problems with lawnmowers, push mowers, riding mowers alike, small engines, is that people let them sit for a long time with fuel in them, especially fuel that has ethanol in it. The fuel is hard on the system, especially when it's allowed to sit for a year or two at a time. If you've got one that's sat for 3 or 4 or more years, you're gonna have a mess. It's gonna be difficult to clean up. You might end up having to trash the carburetor. Carburetors have small ports, so you can get one of these kits. These are called tip cleaners. This one's actually made by Fournet, which is a welding supply company. They're originally for welding equipment, but you can also use them for lawnmowers. They have a wide variety of small knurled pins to help you get into increasingly larger diameters. So this will help you clean those out. Some people say they would never use a metal pin in a soft brass or aluminum hole. These are good. You just have to be careful that you don't ream out a hole. If you ream out a hole, especially in a main jet, then you're going to be actually changing the fuel ratio for your carburetor. So you can use these, you just have to be careful. They come in a wide range of sizes. There's a size chart that I drew out for each one of these. Take it or leave it. This is a pretty good, these are about $8 at Amazon, but I bought some at a show for a couple bucks each. And they do get bent out of shape over time, so it doesn't hurt to have some extras around. Anytime you're cleaning carburetors, you need to have clean teeth, which may or may not be true, but you can never have enough used toothbrushes around for scrubbing this, scrubbing that. The soft teeth in the toothbrush makes for good cleaning on some things, not everything, because they're relatively soft, but sometimes this is just the ticket. So don't throw your old toothbrushes away. Keep a couple of them around for just such a need. Also get an assortment of brushes, like I got these from Harbor Freight. You can get a kit that has soft brass, and it also has steel bristles, and then it has nylon bristles as well for a wide range of cleaning applications. They're relatively inexpensive. Sometimes when you disassemble a carburetor, you want to remove the main emulsion tube, and it takes a screwdriver that has got a relatively straight shank so that you're not scraping the sides inside the carb body. So this one is actually a Briggs & Stratton tool that I think I paid about 14 bucks for this one. It works for what it's designed for, but it's relatively weak and it's easy to twist the tip out of shape. So I'm always on the lookout for other straight shanked screwdrivers to do the same job with. So you can never really have enough of those. I recently acquired this set. It's a small set of twist drills that go all the way down to, I think, about 0.5 millimeters. If you ever need to enlarge a hole, then this is a little pin vise that allows you to actually put a small drill in it to be able to use to ream out a hole. Again, have to be very careful with something like this, because if you change the diameter of a critical hole, then you're potentially going to change to a fuel ratio. You have to be careful about that. Here's another Harbor Freight set that can be had for a few bucks. It's just an assortment of picks. They come in handy in unexpected ways from time. I'm almost 70 years old, so my vision isn't what it used to. I don't think I can ever have enough magnifiers around just for this and that. You never know when these are going to come in handy. Anytime you try to remove the fuel solenoid from the carburetor that's equipped with one, you got to have one of these thin wrenches to be able to get in there. Most of them I think are 1/2 inch diameter, but I fought it for years until I finally decided to grind down an extra wrench to make it thin enough to get in there. And if you come across other applications where you need a thin wrench, then it's good to have them on hand. 9/16 and 1/2 inch are generally the most popular ones. And then of course, after I ground one down, found one at a yard sale for a dime. On the subject of pliers, I don't think you'd ever have enough different types of pliers around. Of course, depends on how many you can accommodate in your drawer space. If you're servicing lawnmowers, you really need some sort of an angled plier, whether it be a 45-degree angle on these Needlenose or like a 90-degree angle on these Needlenose, something like that. You never know when you're going to want something like that. And of course, standard Needlenose in a couple of sizes. They all eventually come in handy. I've even got this long reach one that I pull out every once in a while. Standard slip joint pliers, of course, if you're taking off fuel hose clamps or twisting wire or whatever. These are always handy. I happen to have the luxury of a couple of snap ring pliers, so a lot of times these two pliers are joined together in an adjustable configuration, convertible configuration. You get those as well. I just bought this one this weekend. This is part of a set of 3. They call this like a hose plier or something like that. I think I'll be using these to remove fuel hoses that are temperamental and stubborn. You can never have too many vice grips. I've had these Needlenose vice grips for decades, and I usually only really use them for clamping off fuel lines. So I just added the plastic tubing to keep from damaging fuel lines. You can also buy clamps to clamp off fuel lines. They're relatively inexpensive. You can never have enough vice grips. Vice grip always comes in handy. This is a simple hole punch. So a lot of times I find that when I'm remounting a carburetor and I don't have fresh gaskets for it, I'll end up fabricating gaskets from cardboard, like a cereal box cardboard or maybe a Cheez-It box cardboard. I'm surprised at how many times it's actually fixed a problem that was otherwise a mystery to me. It simply was carburetor is losing air around a gasket, and doubling up on the gasket actually helped. So you can take your existing gasket and draw out the form of a new gasket and cut it out with an X-Acto knife and scissors. I do that a lot. I'm crazy with measuring stuff for the sake of servicing lawnmowers, but it is nice to have a metallic scale. This particular one is a 0.5 millimeters thick, so it comes in handy. Sometimes if you're gapping something, you want to gap it at 0.5 millimeters. I use these to actually determine how much bend there are in my lawnmower blades, and maybe I'll do a video on that in the future. I also keep this cheap little plastic caliper around for just a quick measurement. I've got a $10 Harbor Freight digital caliper as well that I pull out when I really need a good measurement, but I keep this handy. You're gonna need a good set of feeler gauges, and it's convenient if you can have both SAE and metric, but if you got at least one or the other, then you can always do conversions from metric to SAE and back and forth online. I don't know how I ever got along without compressed air before I actually had compressed air. So my compressor is old, antique, 1947, but it does the job. But when you complement it with this $60 Harbor Freight automatic hose reel, then it's really convenient to have that compressed air, have it overhead. I like to drape it from a hook up here, pull it down as I need it, and then I've got compressed air right over my workbench as needed. With rider mowers, eventually you're going to have to do the dreaded tire repair, which I can't imagine anybody likes. I know that I hate it. But one of the basic things is we almost all have tire pressure gauges, but I like this one. This is a 0 to 60 PSI, cheap. I have no idea where I picked this up or what I paid for it. It's kind of a cheapie, but it's got those lower scales. I don't plan to measure anything over like 40 PSI. So this is great to have around. This is the tire chuck that I use most often, simply because it's simple and it does the job. It's nice to have one of these locking tire chucks when it actually works. This is not a very good one. I don't know where I picked this up, but if you're gonna invest in one of these, get a good one. Otherwise, it's just not gonna work for you. I also keep a standard tire chuck around just in case. Sometimes I can't get one of these short ones on the tire I'm trying to inflate, so I keep one of these around too. And then of course, a decent blowgun, at least the basic rubber tip blowgun. Always be careful with compressed air, because something that you're accelerating with compressed air, if it hits you in the face, it's gonna hurt, especially if it hits you in the eyes. Always be careful with compressed air. Also, the like $3 Harbor Freight extended one. This one's not the greatest, but it's better than nothing. I use it especially for cleaning off mower decks and cleaning out crevices and mowers, but it always comes in handy to have a long reach air blow. I also have a couple of drill gauge slash thread diameter gauges around. I rarely ever use these, but they're nice to have around when you need them. Keep a supply of nut drivers around also, but I'll confess that almost everything I've got is secondhand, usually garage sale stuff. I happened to come across these last summer and was thrilled to get a whole set of them. The most popular ones, like 5/16, a lot of screws on push mowers, 5/16, a lot of 8mm, 10mm, 1/4 inch. So those are nice to have around. Torx drivers. I got tired of guessing at the sizes, so I bought a whole kit of Torx drivers, and they hang on my wall until I need them. There's these I wanted to highlight these because these are actually, I feel like if you find a good tool, tell everybody about it. I've had this tool since I was in high school. That was 40 years ago. This is made by the Williams Tool Company, and they're still around because I bought a new one. Just came last week. Love this tool. If you have a chance, buy yourself one of these. It's a 1/4 inch nut driver. There's also a 1/4 inch socket on the handle side. This is one stud that goes all the way through, and the handle was molded around it. So you can actually use this as a nut driver, of course. You can also use it as a ratchet extension. You can use a combination of the two. You loosen up a nut and then take it out by hand, whatever. This is a great tool. Williams. Get yourself one of these. It costs about 15 bucks. There's two basic sizes of spark plugs, sockets. There's 5/8 and then there's also 13/16. But I've also had to remove some spark plugs with a 3/4 deep well. So you may come across the need someday for that. One of the things I recently picked up is a bottle of blue Loctite Threadlocker. And I wish I had done it years ago, but it seems like so many times now we come across something that screws have been over tightened and warped plastic, whether it be a carburetor body or something else. So I've gotten to the habit of cleaning up my screw threads and using Loctite so I don't have to apply so much torque on my screws. India, and it was about 15 bucks for a bottle of it. Loctite. What I've gotten to do lately in the last couple of years is anytime I pull a carburetor off and break it down and rebuild it, I always test the fuel needle and seat ability to seal with a hand vacuum pump. And I'll probably do another video about this at another time, but I figure that if I test a carburetor to make sure that the needle and seat are working before I actually reinstall the carburetor, then it's much less likely that I'm going to have to pull the carburetor again and address a needle and seat that are leaking. Service lawnmower with 30 years, so always keep a supply of Q-tips on hand for cleaning this and that. You just never know. Because like I said, sometimes I have to make gaskets or this or that, and I've got this small set that I've had for years. This might be overkill, but they're handy to have around. Markers, assortment of pencils. I always keep a sharp pencil around in case I want to trace out a gasket or something. Also, sometimes pencil erasers come in handy for cleaning electrical contacts. Keep a nice blue permanent marker and usually a blue Sharpie handy for marking this and that in the workshop. You just never of cleaning solvents to clean the carburetors, clean other surfaces. Pretty much any carburetor cleaner will work. I even sometimes use brake cleaner if that's what I have. You do have to be careful about exposure to plastic and rubber parts with something as harsh as brake cleaner. It's not exactly formulated for plastics, so be careful of that stuff. In that any of your contact with plastics is relatively short contact. I also keep some contact cleaner for cleaning electrical things like ignition switches. Keep a variety of lubricants on hand, some of which for penetrating lubricants to remove stuck bolts, stuck nuts, some of which is just protectant. White lithium grease is a good coating as well as a lubricant. Silicone lubricant is better than using petroleum-based lubricants in that it's more gentle for your plastic parts. And then of course, any of my air tools, I use a few drops of air tool oil in my air tools before I fire them up. Anytime I service a lawnmower that I've had to clean a bunch of corrosion and stuff out of the carburetor, I almost always add a little bit of fuel system cleaner to the next tank full or two. Just kind of helps continue to dissolve out those solids and get them flushed out of the carburetor. I always use a little bit of fuel stabilizer in my equipment when it's going to sit over the winter. I know there's a lot of debate about whether or not this does any good or not, but in the meantime, the debate can rage on, but in the meantime, I'm using Sta-Bil. Keep a little toolbox empty, just in case I have to go on a lawnmower service call somewhere. I can throw a few tools in to take with me. It's nice to have something around to do that. Assortments of small hardware and stuff that's lawnmower related. Generally, I watch for this stuff when it's either on clearance or goes on sale. You just never know. I keep some fuses, some copper washers, some spring kits, some O-rings, miscellaneous screws, roll pins, spring clips, stuff like that. You just never know. Storage solutions. This is one I stumbled on a few years back. I got this at Sears, but I like this solution for storing your wrenches. It has different storage solutions for their socket sets. This is the best $5 I ever spent. I came across this one at a yard sale some years back. So this one will hold, of course, 1/4 inch, 3/8, 1/2 inch, and then there's a miscellaneous drawer. It's always nice to have all your sockets and ratchets in one. Keep a couple of extendable magnets around as well, because I drop a lot of stuff. They're relatively inexpensive and they'll save. Dealing with riding mowers, you're always dealing with battery problems. I've got a Schumacher Charger that I've had for some years. Not crazy about it. It seems to be very temperamental in terms of when it wants to charge a battery and when it says, I ain't charging a battery. A friend actually loaned me this one. I'd really like to have one like this, simply because it's simpler and more dependable. You need a 12-volt test light if you're diagnosing electrical issues. This is a very basic light that will help you with riding mowers, 12-volt issues. And I've only just recently purchased this. It's a Schumacher as well. This cost me about $35. It's a battery load tester. It's got a built-in meter that tells you what your static voltage is on your battery, and then it also has the ability to actually load your battery down and then read the voltage under load. Mixed reviews on Amazon, but hopefully this will work out for me as well. So I've also got my $20 Harbor Freight meter. If you know how to use a volt, ohm, ammeter, these are handy to have around. They're relatively inexpensive. This is the only meter I've had for the last 20 years. I've had this mini tire changer from Harbor Freight for about 4 seasons, and it's made so that I had it made so that I can actually swap it out with my Vise on the corner of the bench here when it becomes necessary for me to service tires. So it actually does a fairly good job for a little bit of money that you invest in it once you learn how to use it. I also happened to find a couple of tire spoons at a yard sale last summer, so I was actually glad to get those as well. Just a little bit of soapy water in a Windex bottle that I was able to. I also have a variety of pullers simply because I picked them up at yard sales, but this one I took as payment for a service work I did on a push mower a few years back. So it's always handy to have a puller around or two. This is a blade balancer I picked up a few years back for $5 or $6. It's supposed to work like, put your blade on there in center, and if the blade tilts to one side or the other, it's got some unbalance. This one obviously does. I don't use this one very often, simply because I prefer to actually test a blade in my vise instead, like this. Basically insert a small shank screwdriver and then put your blade on there, and if there's any real unbalance, it's going to roll to one side or the other. This blade has a little bit of unbalance, so I would probably try to deal with that if I were putting this one back in service. But this works as well as that does, or better. Some years ago, but I use this almost exclusively for cutting fuel line. It uses a standard blade, and it does a very good job of making nice, crisp, squared cuts with rubber fuel line. I also like to keep a couple of torque wrenches around because they're relatively inexpensive if you buy them at Harbor Freight. I don't know that they're super accurate, but for much of the work I do, I'm not too terribly concerned about super accurate torque on fasteners. The nice thing about having a torquer is it's easy to compare the torque you're putting on one fastener compared to the torque that you're putting on the one beside it. So like if you're torquing 12 bolts on a head, I don't know that they'd be exactly right because I don't know how accurate this wrench is, but they're all going to be roughly the same amount of torque. They're on hand not only for grinding, sharpening mower blades when I need to take a lot of material off, but you can also swap out the grinding wheel for a cut-off wheel on the rare event that you need to cut something through completely. I also have an air-powered die grinder, which I use when I don't have to take a whole lot of metal off. These are Norton Wheels, and they were relatively inexpensive, so I keep a few of those on hand for sharpening blades. I've actually only done one valve job in my entire career, which spans about 6 years. So I didn't pay a whole lot for these tools. This is a tool to help you grip a valve, and use that in conjunction with valve grinding compound to actually make new seats, fresh surfaces on your heads for your valves. Let's keep a few paint filters on hand as well. Not because I'm filtering paint, but if I'm draining gasoline for the purpose of reusing it, then I don't want to get solids back in my fuel. So also sometimes in the process of doing diagnostics, if I want to see what's in the gasoline, I'll filter it through a paint strainer. Keep a number of empty yogurt tins on hand or empty juice tins on hand because they're so handy for storing parts as you're cleaning a carburetor or working in and out, or maybe you're sorting something and you just need a clean place to set something down. These are free and they're handy to have around. Other ideas, handy to have around. Toilet paper when I need something to wipe a dipstick with rather than paper towels because it's cheaper. 1947 Westinghouse air brake company compressor. Yeah, it's an antique, but it's dependable. Does the job. Doesn't matter what kind of compressor you have. You just really need something that's dependable. Well, I added this to my Amazon wish list last Christmas, and lo and behold, my wife bought me one. So I've only used it a handful of times, but I'm looking forward to using it more and more. This is basically a hydraulic operated lift that I use to raise push mowers up to where I can actually work on them. This is actually from Jigs. Another gift from my wife some years ago. Wasn't exactly the one I asked for, but this is what she got me, and it's worked out great. Rolling toolbox with a work surface on it. Oftentimes I'm servicing push mowers on this surface, and if I need to move from point A to point B, I can just take my work with me. What about collecting things over the years is keeping it organized. So I find as I get older, I don't remember so well anymore where I left things or where I found something. So getting stuff organized is the key to actually being able to function as you get older. Can't remember things, so I'm a lot happier when my stuff is organized. I know what I've got, I know where to go to get it without having to look for it. I got to highlight the most useful tool in my entire garage, and that is internet access with a nice big monitor. If you have to stop and go look up parts, or maybe you have to go shop for something, or maybe you need an exploded view of this or that, then having the internet at your fingertips is, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't be doing lawn mow service, because things just get too complicated when you're trying to do everything over the phone with somebody. So this is just certainly not an extensive list of tools that I keep around to service lawnmowers, many of which you can get along without. There's probably other tools that I have around that I haven't highlighted for one reason or another. Maybe you've got tools in your shop that I haven't picked up yet, but that would be beneficial. Hey, don't be afraid to call me out on it. The other reason why we post this type of video online is so that we can learn from other people's input. So for that reason, I certainly welcome your constructive critiques and suggestions.